Coalition for Property Rights celebrated its 10th anniversary. Dan has been deeply involved in the Central Florida business and political communities for more than 10 years. Most recently, he worked in the Florida Senate and the Florida House as a legislative assistant. Prior to that, he was the public affairs manager of Sprint and BART and CenturyLink, all at once. His responsibilities included lobbying, community affairs, and serving on boards of directors such as Winter Park, Goldenrod, Seminole County Regional Chambers of Commerce, and other stuff. Before moving to Orlando in 1998, Dan served as the Campus Crusade Director of Affairs for Eurasia, the former Soviet Union. During his 14 years in Moscow, Dan traveled extensively as a popular seminar leader and conference speaker. Let's welcome Dan Peterson to speak to us.
Well, great, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking your Friday and your Saturday to come out and just confront some really important issues that have to do with, I think, the future of America, the future of the United States. If we don't solve some of these things, we can kiss our country goodbye. So I appreciate you being here. Just a word about the Coalition for Property Rights before I get into the presentation so you understand this. The coalition was founded about 12 years ago by a group of small businessmen in Orlando, Florida, because they saw an erosion to private property rights. Some were developers, some were in real estate, others were investors, but they saw a big change and they got together and decided to do something. And they have played some roles in the Kelo versus New London case, unsuccessfully, regretfully, but in the Amendment 4, stopping that process that took place a couple of years ago, and on and on and on. So we are a movement of property rights advocates, and we have two objectives. One is to promote, and the second is to protect private property rights. By the way, can everybody hear okay? Not too loudly? Okay. So that's what we do, and we do it through three ways. One is we try to educate people on what private property rights are and how they're under attack. A second thing we do is we advocate. I go to Tallahassee or to a county commission meeting or to a city commission meeting to advocate for people who are fighting government for their rights. And the third thing we do is we try to activate people. We have a small seminar that's called, or a short seminar called The Effective Advocate, that teaches people how to work through the channels in government, how to frame an issue, how to create your own local movement. And I'll tell you, that's really important because property issues are different in every county, every municipality. So we need teams of people that can go into those commission meetings and confront these people and stand up for their private property rights. So those are the three things we do. There is a brochure, it looks like this, and there's a bunch of them that are over on the table. And so all of my contact information is on the back of this brochure. My email is under my photo and our address and our phone number and our website, proprights.com. So later on, please go and take one of those and read about it, and you can visit our website to discover more about that. What I want to share with you is what I have found to be the greatest threat to private property rights, and it is an international threat, although we seem to experience in our country more than any other place, and that is the issue of sustainable development. And I know you're hopefully all of you are thinking, that's Agenda 21. Well, we're going to get into that in just a minute. But I'm trying to use some language that appeals greatly to legislators and other people when we go to talk about this. Because people, frankly, are a little bit afraid to talk about Agenda 21. But sustainable development is common language, and it's the lingo we need to go through. I think most everybody is familiar with this piece of the Declaration of Independence penned by Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by our Creator, with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson took that trilogy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, from an 18th century economist by the name of John Locke. And he plagiarized it, but he changed it a little bit. John Locke, who was a free enterprise guy, he said it this way: we are endowed by a Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that is life, liberty, and property. That was the original meaning, but Thomas Jefferson thought this is what the pursuit of happiness is all about. It's not about greed necessarily, but it is about the pursuit of property, because that causes prosperity and independent living. And property rights begins with you yourself. You are property, and you belong to yourself. So that's where property rights begin. What you own is your property, and it doesn't have to be just land. It can be your right to have a firearm. That's property. Your car is property. Your house. What you produce is yours. That's property again. And that's the broader picture that John Locke and Thomas Jefferson intended with our Declaration of Independence. And that's one of the reasons why we are the most successful and prosperous nation in history. And hopefully we're going to stay that way. Here are what a couple of other founding fathers had to say about this issue. Arthur Lee was a colonist, a Massachusetts legislator back in the 1700s when we were fighting for independence. He said the right of property is the guardian of every other right, and to deprive people of this is in fact to deprive them of their liberty. And think about that. If you don't have property, you are dependent on someone else to house yourself and to feed yourself and to protect yourself. But it wasn't that way in the beginning. Our founding fathers understood that. When you own property, you can take care of yourself, and you can protect and feed and house yourself. Our second president, John Adams, said that property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. I think that's all pretty clear to us. And Alexander Hamilton, I'm sure you've seen his face recently on some money being exchanged. One great object of government, at least one great that it should be, is personal protection and the security of property. So that is why we were founded, and that's why we've become the exceptional nation that we are. But there is a different world viewpoint, and there is a group of people who have a totally different perspective on where this goes, and I want you to see this. This is a conference report from a UN conference on habitat from 1976. Listen to this. This is shocking. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. How many of you own property here, by the way? Okay. They just said you should not own and control your land. Shouldn't be subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. That phrase, social injustice, is not a recent phrase. That goes back to 1976. And then the quote continues on. Again, this is in the preamble report. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable to its protection as an asset and the achievement of long-term objectives in human settlement policies and strategies. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But what public control means is government control. It means government ownership and control of land. And when government steps in and begins to control land, there are a lot of bad things that happen, and we'll talk more about that. But just think about that for a minute. That is a perspective on private property right there. Totally in antithesis to what our founding fathers said. Now there's some other people who have weighed in on this concept, and I'm just going to hit a few of them. Maybe these are some quotes you've heard before. A man by the name of Harvey Rubin, who was actually clerk of the courts down in Miami-Dade County. Individual rights, including property rights, must take a backseat to the collective. In other words, public control of land. Maurice Strong, who is the author of, in fact, Agenda 21 and other documents such as that. Consumption patterns of the affluent middle class are not sustainable. Capitalism is bad for the environment. Is it not our duty to destroy it? Now that's pretty strong stuff. And then this other quote, the Club of Rome is a international consortium. It's a consulting firm, if you will, especially to the United States. And something that they wrote here, the common enemy of humanity is man. And note this, in search of a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea. We came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. So, you know, all of these things we've been hearing about for years and years and years. It wasn't that it was based on science or it was a real issue. We came up with this idea to unite people. So that's something we need to be aware of. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention, so we all get the blame. And it's only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. And I tell you what, when you read some of the document, it does appear that's exactly what they're trying to do. So that is the totally different perspective. And there are some common threads that describe the philosophy. And I call this the extreme environmentalism or sustainable development movements. And extreme environmentalism and sustainable development gives preference to nature over man. It gives preference to the collective rather than individuals. It gives preference to mandates over choice. And it gives preference especially to ideology over common sense. You know, I think in the first 2 years of the Obama administration, I kept thinking, why would he do that? Why would someone not want to do the pipeline between Canada and the Gulf of Mexico? I mean, there's no good reason. Well, he and others are ideologically driven, not common sense driven. And so if you have that ideology and you hold on to it, it doesn't matter what the facts are, it doesn't matter what common sense are, you're going to make a decision based on that. So it's an important thing to do. Now, there are two results of this movement, sustainable development movement. One is the limiting of private property rights, but the other is the elimination of private property ownership altogether. And we're going to look at, I'm going to give you some examples of both of those right now. In the area of limiting private property rights, one of the ways that they are limited is what I consider to be the overreaching application of vague laws. And here are some vague laws that have been written: the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Clean Water Act. Now, in the beginning, all of these, by the way, were written and passed in the late 60s and early 70s. And in fact, they did provide some good change in the way that we look at the environment. The Environmental Policy Act says that the environment must be considered in all other forms of legislation and policy development by our government. You know, I can remember the days way back when, reading about Love Canal and how it was on fire. I remember I lived for a time being in San Bernardino, California. Our offices were in the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, and you could walk out on any given day, and it just looked like fog. And then one day, the Santa Ana winds blew there and blew all of that out, and there were mountains out there. And I didn't know, it was smog. That's what it was. Well, that needed to be addressed, and so I'm thankful for the Clean Air Act. I like the Clean Water Act that cleaned up places like Love Canal and prevented governments, frankly, from dumping raw sewage into places like where I've been down in Central Florida where I live. The worst culprit of wrecking Lake Apopka, although it's blamed on farmers and runoff of fertilizer, the city was dumping raw sewage into that lake for years and years and years. So there's enough blame to go around, and thankfully, we did pass some laws that were good. But these laws were written so vaguely that now extremists have been able to come in, and the agencies that use these laws have greatly restricted property rights, among other things. One case that I'll share with you is a case that was recently in the Supreme Court, probably about 9 months ago. It's called the Sackett case. The Sacketts were a couple who decided to kind of build their retirement dream house in a place out in Idaho. And they found property between two other private residences. They bought the land and they began to level the property so that they could build their home. When that began, the EPA came in and said, you were in violation of, I think it was the Clean Water Act, because you're on wetlands here. Now, the only time there were wetlands there is if it rained really hard and the water cooled for a little bit. But the EPA told this couple, you're in violation of the law. We're going to fine you for what you've done to the property already, and for every day you don't return it to its original state, you're going to suffer fines as well. Sackett said, wait a minute, this is not, the EPA would hear none of it. And so the Sacketts appealed and said, you've got to hear our case. The EPA said, you have no right to make an appeal to us. You just have to do what we say. So the Sacketts, thanks to a group of pro bono attorneys that work with a group called the Pacific Legal Foundation, some good friends of ours, helped out, took the case on. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found in favor of the Sacketts, that in fact they do have the right to do it. They still don't have the case settled as to their land, they just have the right to be heard now. And that's how these, we'll talk about lengthy litigation in a minute. But the Sacketts are a prime case of where the Clean Water Act was taken to an extreme by the EPA, and they haven't had the use of their property yet. Here's another one, what I call inordinate, burdensome regulations. The Wendlers are some friends of ours that live just over on the coast in St. Augustine. And they bought, next to Flagler College, they purchased 8 parcels of land, all adjoining. On 7 of the parcels, there were big houses, 2- and 3-story homes, that were divided into rooms, and the students rented the rooms there. And so the houses were pretty dilapidated. And then Flagler College built a new dormitory, and the students began to move out. The homes were not worth the money to bring in repairs on these places. And so the Wendlers decided what they would do is they would demolish the homes, and then they would put a nice bed and breakfast kind of a hotel with boutique shops and match the downtown area. This is literally a block from downtown St. Augustine in what they call the historical Flagler area. And it was, I mean, I saw the elevations, it was beautiful stuff. They went to the city and the plans got approved, but when they went to get the certificate of demolition on these 7 homes, the city said no. And all of a sudden, these dilapidated homes were considered to be historical. Now, they weren't on anybody's list, but they were all of a sudden historical. And so the Wendlers did what most people do. They say, well, we'll have them move then. Let's do that. And that frequently happens. And again, the city said no. So they had approved plans to build. They just didn't have the opportunity to demolish the homes. And so they went to court. The local circuit court guy, who many think was partnering with those officials in St. Augustine, he said, you don't even have a case. He threw the case out. The Wendlers appealed to the 5th District Court of Appeals that overturned that and unanimously found in favor of the Wendlers and said, you do have a court case and this should go to trial. The city appealed, though, to the Florida Supreme Court. And lo and behold, they got one of these right. They said, in fact, we're not even going to hear this. The Wendlers do have a case, and they said they upheld the decision of the Court of Appeals. And so the Wendlers are going to get their day in court. Hallelujah. Sad part is, they have been at this since about 2008. They have been going through this. They're virtually bankrupt. And the houses are still there, but they are going to get their day in court. And I'll tell you what, I think when they get their day in court, a jury is going to find in their favor. Now, who knows what the city of St. Augustine will do to try to block that in the meantime. But these burdensome regulations of demolition and meeting all of these standards and not being able to do what you want with your property, the law that they use, by the way, is called the Burt-Harris Act. It basically says if you have property with an economic expectation and government steps into some kind of rule or regulation, then you have the right to appeal it. And it removes the sovereignty, the protection of the government, and allows a private citizen to sue the government for burdensome regulations. This was a huge case that the Supreme Court decided, because it means if any of you now get in a situation like that, there is precedent for you to go to court. Before there wasn't. This is the first case that was heard and approved that supports the Burt-Harris legislation. So that's really critical. I don't know if you know what exactions are. A lot of times when you want to improve property, or a business or something wants to improve property, the government will say, well, yeah, we kind of like your plans, but we'd like you to make these changes, a little more green space. Would you build a fountain over here? Would you fund a stoplight out here at this intersection? These are called exactions, but they get to be extortions. And the Kuntz case, is anyone familiar with the Kuntz case? This is a case where a man by the name of Coy Kuntz, he had property in Orlando, Orange County area. He had 20 acres. And he was thinking about retirement. He thought, I'm going to get this property ready for development, and then I'm going to sell it, and that'll be my retirement. Well, Coy Kuntz went through all the rigors of going to develop his property. He needed a permit for the St. John's Water Management District before he could do anything with his property. And so he went to them with a permit, and they said, okay, we're okay with the development. He only wanted to develop a little more than 3 of the 20 acres. But they said, we'll do that, but on one condition. We want you to put the rest of the property into conservation. So, he didn't want to fool around and fight that. He didn't really care, so he agreed to that. So they continued the permitting process, and when they got to the end of the process and he had done all of this stuff, St. John's came back to him and said, there's one more thing. Before we okay your permit, we have some property about 7 miles over this way, and it's some flood control property that we have, and we need some repairs done on the property. We'd like you to pay for the repairs on that property 7 miles away. He considered it for a little bit of time, but he went back and he looked, and he added up, for him to improve their property, it was going to cost him another $150,000 by his estimate. And at that point, he said no. So they went to court, and it got in the process, and Coy Koontz actually died. And his son, Coy Koontz Jr., picked it up. And there was defeat. They appealed. This ended up about 6 or 7 months ago in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court listened to this case, and the Supreme Court gave a verdict in favor of Coy Koontz family. So they said this is extortionate, it's wrong, and it's illegal. So that was a great case. You know how long that case went on? That case went on for 19 years. 19 years. Now, when you're trying to make a mortgage and you're trying to pay insurance on the property and taxes and all of this other stuff, most of us, and then you have to hire a lawyer, a city in the county or a water management district that has someone on full-time retainer, they can afford to litigate that thing to death. Most of us are not in that position. And when Representative Perry comes, we're going to be working on some legislation to somewhat limit that, by the way. And I won't get into that. So that's why I included lengthy litigation. Something has to be done to redefine something that's called rightness. And that says when a government infringes on your rights, there's a certain amount of time before you can actually sue. And the city can nickel and dime you for years before you can exercise your right. And that's called rightness. That sounds more like rotting fruit to me. So that has to be redefined, and that's one of the issues. I wish I had time to describe all of these things to you in much more detail, because the story is first. But we'll be soon. Here's another thing. I know you're probably more aware of this. Property rights can be severely limited if these things go into effect. These unelected regional coordination groups is what I call them. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in 2009, President Obama signed a thing called the Great American Outdoor Act. And a part of that authorized the Department of Interior to pursue a thing called the National Blueways System. What the Blueways System says is this: pick a river from its mouth back to its origin and include all of its tributaries, and if a group of concerned stakeholder citizens come forward, then we'll work with them and fund them to rewrite the way the natural resources and water and air and land are regulated, not just along the river, but its entire watershed. Now, if you did that regulation in Florida with 2 rivers, you could almost regulate 100% of Florida right there. Take that Apalachicola area and take the St. Johns River. It covers just about everything. So this is a map of the first Blueway System river. It's the Connecticut River, runs for over 400 miles. You can see the river in blue, but the green is its entire watershed. And so you get unelected officials. It works through executive order and through taxpayer money to rewrite the rules and the regulations regarding natural resources, water, land, things like that. That's talk about the no representation. There's another one that's like this that was proposed, and a group of, this is out in the west, I think it's called the White River, out in the Idaho-Montana area. Some congressmen got wind of it, and the Department of Interior was actually going there trying to influence people to come up and start a blueways system out there. And the congressional people told Ken Salazar and the people he sent to get out of our territory. We're not interested in that. So this is something that's out there, though. and people are following it up. Here's another one. You know, if you go to your website sometime and go to www.doi.gov/LCC, this map will pop up. And it's really the same thing, but instead of using a watershed to control, it uses what they call landscapes. And they have divided the United States up into 22 territories, 22 landscapes, and again, it's the same thing. Volunteer stakeholders come forward to write the rules and the regulations. By the way, one of the other rivers, I couldn't track down who the stakeholders were in the Connecticut River and find documentation, but there was another river that they were trying to do this with. Every one of the stakeholders was one of the more extreme environmentalist groups. There were no elected officials involved, there were no business people involved, nothing like that. So, sir, you have a question? Yes, it's DOI, standing for Department of Interior, DOI.gov, and then do a / guess it's like LCC, okay? And you'll get that. So these are regional, and you're probably aware that down in South Florida, there's a group doing the same thing. It's called the 750 Project, and it's 7 counties and 50 years, and it's all couched in nice language like, we want to aid the prosperity of the region and have a great place to live. But it's all about sustainable development and people who are actually even unelected people getting control of this because they have an ideology that they want to follow. So we need to be aware of that. And I've heard that some of the, if this comes to your county, I've heard that some of the citizens down there, I think in the Lake Wales area, have pursued this, and one of the 7 counties has decided to pull out because of the protest of people. So again, when we stand up and take a voice, we can make some things happen. Limitations on private property are one thing, but it's a lot easier to control things if you just flat out own the property. And that's one of the big threats here. It's the elimination of private property. And one of the ways in which this is being done is a strategy called the growing federal estate. I don't know if you're aware of this, but over half of the western United States is owned by the federal government. In fact, if you took it across the United States, 1 in every 3 acres is owned by the federal government right now. I was at a Heritage Conference, Foundation Conference, one-day seminar, and a congressman from Utah was speaking to us, and he was bemoaning the fact that 87% of his state was owned by the federal government. Now, if you only have 13% of the property to tax for things like your Medicaid or your education, you're in a world of problems right there. And now they get subsidies from the federal government to augment that because they don't have any taxable land. But who wants to do that? And he has tried and tried and tried to propose ways of the federal, buying it back from the federal government, getting it back, but they won't do it. And think about what happens up in Alaska. We have all these great natural resources up there in these reserves, and we have the best technology in the world, which is safe and affordable, things like that. And we can't even get into that property because the federal government owns it, and they're not about to let go of any of that. So this is a huge issue here in the United States, and there are bills in Congress that want to expand this and take millions of other acres, for all kinds of reasons. It might be historical reasons, it might be National Park Service. There's a lot of different ways that they can do this. It might be through a regional coordination group. Now, here in Florida, and I know you can't read this, this is on the Department of Environmental Protection Florida website. Actually, when you see this, it actually takes you to Florida forever, I believe. But in Florida, over 30% of the land is owned by government. 27% of our land, and I'm talking about not 27% of the 30%, it's times that, but it's 27% of all Florida land is in conservation today. And what this sheet does is it breaks out how much land is in federal control, how much is in state control, and how much is in local entity, county, municipality control. So it's just a huge issue. Yes, sir.
And where can we get that, Dan?
I found this on the Department of Environmental Protection website, And you might just put in the search engine, conservation lands, but I think when you click on that link, I'm pretty sure it actually links you right to Florida Forever. But it's there. I'll try to document that later. But that's a lot of land. The video that you saw with John up here talking to Senator Latvala, we tried to float a bill through the legislative session last year. It was a bill that basically said this: in light of this, in fact, the whole reason I found out about this, by the way, was last December in a cabinet, or 2 Decembers ago, in a cabinet meeting. A number of the environmentalists went to the cabinet and they said to the cabinet, we need more money so we can buy more conservation land. And so the cabinet discussed it and said, okay, we're going to try to get $8 to $9 million for the purchase of land back to you for the conservation. They were outraged. And there was a reporter there that covered the story and said what they really wanted was $200 to $300 million out of the budget to buy conservation lands. That's when I thought, my goodness, how much land is in conservation? And when I found this out, I was pretty shocked. So this is a big deal. So we decided to do a bill to at least slow that process a little bit. So here's what the bill said. Senate Bill 584. So you could actually look it up. It's 2 pages long. It basically says this: if you're a government entity, state, county, municipality, if you're a government entity, you can buy more land for conservation. But before you do, we want to see a current and accurate inventory of what is already owned. We want money in the budget to maintain the land that is already owned. And we'd like a study to be done to estimate what you think the cost of maintaining this proposed property is going to cost the taxpayers. Now that's just good stewardship of land, and that's fiscal responsibility. Now we also had a piece in there that said for every acre you buy out of the private sector, we want you to sell one back to them. Related, boy, you talk about a howl in Tallahassee, 55. And John got up and spoke very eloquently on this, and you saw, when Senator Latvala, he walked in as the bill was being introduced and discussed by our sponsor, Senator Hayes. Senator Jack Latvala said, walking to his chair, because he was late for the meeting, "You're trying to destroy my baby project, Florida Forever." So he took credit for Florida Forever, so he was already a little upset. I don't think he had read the bill, frankly, but someone had told him this stuff and painted it a totally different color. Yeah, he was involved in it. Yeah. So this was a big issue, and a number of us spoke to that, and you saw his attitude. We don't answer the questions, we just ask the questions. Boy, see, that's what a town hall ought to be, where they answer the questions, they don't ask the questions. And that's the way some of these committee meetings need to start being. So this is a big issue, and if you haven't heard about this, stay tuned with us on this, because there's a group called Conserve Florida, and it's run by former Senator and Governor Bob Graham, the vice. Pardon me. Yeah. There's a senator, one of the local senators I used to have to work with. He was the author of the septic system bill that we had to go and undo. His name is Lee Constantine. They kind of head up this organization in Florida, and they're working with a DC lobbyist group called Conservation Campaigns. And they raise millions of dollars to fund campaigns. So here's the Bob Graham campaign. They are out right now collecting petitions to put on the 2014 ballot an amendment to our Constitution that will say that 1/3 of all document stamps in transactions of property, 1/3 will be put into a trust fund for the purpose of buying land for conservation. And that will go on for 10 years. So that's going to put a huge amount of money in their control, and it's also going to eliminate a lot of private property because they'll have this money to buy that land. So that is something I hope to be informing you about a lot more. We're going to come back, by the way, with the conservation lands bill again. Senator Hayes last year said, I'm going to bring this, he said, I've got 4 more years to work up here. I'm going to bring this bill every year. So he was very adamant, and I'm sure we'll be doing battle on that and some other things. But this is one of those ways where private property can be eliminated. Another thing that I'll just mention briefly, I was in Alachua County for a seminar about a year ago was on eminent domain. But one of the panelists was the man that headed up the Alachua County version of Florida Forever. And he talked so excitedly about how he had all this money, and they went around and they bought up all this conservation land in Alachua County. And then he said, but then the money ran out, and the recession hit, things like that. So he said, we just developed a different strategy. We started mapping out the county, and we just started declaring conservation easements. Now, once your land has been declared conservation easement, and you're in that situation, you can't even cut the grass. So it's not ownership, you still own it, you just can't use it, so you may as well not have it. And forget trying to sell that unless someone really wants to buy a conservation easement. So these are some of the things that happen. And you know, when a person, a private citizen, puts his land into conservation for tax purposes, and that's normally why they would choose to do that, that land is in conservation in perpetuity. So that's something to be aware of. And again, I'm skirting on some areas where we need to change public policy and the law to protect private property owners, plus just inform them of what their decision really means, not just for them, but for the long term. I mean, it's ludicrous to say, we're going to put this land into conservation. That's like saying, we'll never see any other need for it, and we're just going to set it aside. So we need to be wise. And what John said was very true. These people don't know where the end line is. They don't have a goal, it's just more. And I'll get into that in a minute. Now, I studied textiles at Georgia Tech, and I don't know if you know what warp and woof is. When you weave cloth, the horizontal threads are called the warp, and the vertical lines are called the woof. So the warp and the woof, and that's where two things end. But what I'm trying to do here is join all of these past laws that were in the past, and clean air, clean water, all of those environmental issues with current day things. They all meet in a nexus, and that nexus took place in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, where a document was officially signed at the Earth Summit, and that document, of course, as you know, is what is called Agenda 21. And as they say, it's a new global partnership for sustainable development. You know, it was funny. I remember my 4th month of working with CPR, I was on a radio interview. About all I knew about property rights at that point was what we had written in this brochure. And so at the end of the interview, the woman who was the interviewer, she said to me, she said, well, you must be a huge opponent of Agenda 21. And I said, what's Agenda 21? Wow, did I make a mistake on that one? So she said, well, it's only the biggest property rights threat in the world. So when we got off of the interview, I started going on the internet and looking for Agenda 21. I saw a lot of websites about it. Some of the stuff, I thought, man, that sounds pretty extreme. Some of it alarmed me. Some of it I knew was just flat not true. So I did what most of you would have done. I thought, I'm just going to read this little document myself and find out what Agenda 21 says, so at least I'll be able to say I looked at it. So I went to the UN website and I started to download Agenda 21. I didn't know it was 500 pages of legalese documents. But I did download it, and I did read it cover to cover. So what I want to share with you is some of the stuff I found out about it. Everything I'm telling you today is first-hand documentable stuff, okay? I'm not trying to share opinion here. This is just what they have to say. It's out there. You just have to go look for it. By the way, here's an interesting way for you to think about Agenda 21. Have any of you all ever gone to the Florida Constitution and read about our comprehensive plan? You know, a state comprehensive plan covers just about everything. You know, from agriculture to education to energy policy to health care to property rights to, you name it, it's in there. Agenda 21 is a comprehensive plan for the globe. That's all it is. It's just a little bit bigger. Sustainable development, meeting today's needs without compromising future generations to meet theirs. Well, that sounds pretty good until you get into the details. And they're found in these 3 E's of sustainability. We have environmental sustainability, and that's the one we hear about the most. And then there's the economic sustainability. And then there's this thing called equity, and that's code for social justice again. So, and all of those things are supposed to be in balance. Unfortunately, keeping our environment sustainable is killing our economy and the rest of what we're doing. In the UN preamble here, it says, for this strategy to work, it will require a substantial flow of new and additional resources to developing countries. That means it has to come from developed countries, of which we're probably the most generous. So in other words, we're talking about a huge global transfer of wealth, and of course they're going to say it's about eradicating poverty and hunger and disease and things like that, but it's really all about controlling things. And that's why I go back to this slide, this quote we looked at earlier. Land shouldn't be treated as an asset and controlled by individuals. It ought to be in the public sector. Sustainable development, for it to succeed, it requires the transfer of private property ownership and control into government ownership and control. It's just that simple. And hence, all the strategies begin to make sense when you look at it through this lens. Now, how many of you are familiar with the Wildlands Project? You familiar with this? Okay, not everybody. The Wildlands Project is someone's concept of what our country will look like when sustainable development has achieved its objective. What it calls for is it calls for all of us to be living in urban centers that are affectionately called human settlements. Isn't that nice? So we all live in these human settlements that are walkable communities with a lot of mass transportation, reduced carbon footprints, mostly living on retail stores on ground floors, but high-rise living, very few cars, a lot of bicycles, things like that. That's the smart growth concept here. And so this is what it calls for. Around the urban centers will be buffer zones that will make a transition from urban to what the rest of our country will be in its wilderness. And all of the red and the yellow and the orange you see on this map is all wilderness area. They say it's the place where man will be the stranger. And so that's what this looks like. Now, as was mentioned, I spent 14 years of my life living in Moscow, Russia. I've seen the Wildlands Project and what it looks like. I lived in the city of Moscow, and Moscow was a city of 16 million people. This was back in the 80s and then in the 90s. That was the population of Florida. Can you imagine the entire population of Florida living in one city? There was not one single dwelling home. Everybody lived in apartments. Very few cars, everyone getting around on just a dilapidated transportation system. And it was the wildlands. And when you could take a train from one city to the other, and you could go for just hours sometimes and not see anything but wilderness. So I tell people, I said, I've lived in the Wilderness Project, and I tell you, we don't want to go there. We don't want to live there. It's not much fun, and it was awful. So, one other thing I'll just mention on this, let me hasten on for a couple minutes. Here are a couple of the broad strokes of what Agenda 21 calls for, if you're not familiar with this. Calls for shaping public opinion so that Agenda 21 will be accepted. Anybody here ever heard of Earth Day? Now, Earth Day was actually started before the Agenda 21 document came out. But once the Agenda 21 document came out, it became an international holiday, if we'll put it that way. It is a brilliant PR campaign, and it has worked. Legal mechanisms and regulatory systems to write laws and regulation and ordinances and stuff like this. The Clean Air Act, or the Clean Water Act, or the Endangered Species Act is a mechanism. It's a law, it's legislation upon which all of these things can now flow. And the agencies that apply these laws, they don't really have to answer to anybody, but they get all this rulemaking and enforcement opportunity. So it's dangerous stuff. Calls for agencies to do the monitoring and the enforcement. Well, the EPA is a perfect example of that. That's just what they do. It calls for teaching everyone that comes to our education system. I'll tell you what, Agenda 21 has been around for 21 years. That is almost an entire generation, and this has been taught to almost everybody. So it's permeated. Even, in fact, I was speaking in one place, and the guy, he stood up and he said, I'm a student at Rollins College. We have a PhD in sustainable development. So this is major stuff that's going through our education system. Preparing media in business and industry. What bill do you not get where it says in the envelope, this bill was made from recyclable paper? And let me just say parenthetically, I don't mean to sound non-conservative because I am. I like conservation. I think where we can conserve things and where we can recycle and be wise stewards of our environment, those are great things. But when they start to take away our freedoms And we don't need to sacrifice freedoms in order to have those things. That's where we need to speak up and take it. Certifying all of our government administration people, the people that probably are in your city or county planning department, I'll bet they've been through some certification course on sustainable development. You know, and then of course you want to elect the officials to pass the laws and stuff. This is just a table of contents. I'm going to run through this a little fast, by the way. This presentation, especially about sustainable development, this PowerPoint is on our website. If you go to our website, proprights.com, you'll see a blue toolbar. In the middle tab is called e-library, electronic library. You click on that, you'll see a link that says Agenda 21, and you'll see this. Actually, when I first heard about Agenda 21, so I could explain it to someone, I wrote a 5-page executive summary of Agenda 21 that is fully footnoted, so you can see that, and you can use that to take this into your elected officials. It doesn't sound extremist. It uses normal language, and it tells about that. And then there's the PowerPoint presentation. You could walk that in and look it up and show it to somebody. And then I put it into a speech form for those of you who'd like to get out and speak about it. So, yes, sir.
Could you please repeat the name of that website?
Proprights.com. It's on the back of the brochure, okay?
Okay.
Right there. So that's the table of contents. 40 chapters of just fascinating reading. If you have insomnia, I would recommend it. This is an Agenda 21 scorecard that monitor the nations of the world in 33 different areas. And again, you can see this on the website where you can read it. I know this is too small here. Now, global warming, now called climate change for obvious reasons, is the catalyst to scare us into going for all of these other things. These are the things that have been going on that we don't hear a lot about. You've got governance systems based on regions of the world. Some of them are transnational, in fact. This is the way, by the way, the Soviet Union operated. The Soviets had an elected parliament, had a wonderfully written constitution. Of course, when you went to your election and voted for your person, there was only one choice to vote for, but they did that. But they didn't have any decision-making power. The power in the Soviet Union rested upon people who controlled regions, and that was primarily top Communist Party officials. By the way, do you know what the Russian word is for council? It's the word Soviet. So just a little Russian lesson there. But that's how they controlled through the regions. The government did nothing but implement the policies of the regions. And that's what the 750 group and the LCC, you know, the landscape conservation things, and the Blue-Way system. It's the idea of regional people setting the policy, and then the government just has to go and implement it. So that's the thing to think about. You know, if we're going to be transferring global wealth, we've got the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization to enhance that. Things like a system of jurisprudence. We have the World Court. I mean, if we don't follow what the plans call for in the nations of the world, we can be punished, we can be boycotted, we can be invaded, for all I know. And then, of course, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's a part of the UN that's called the System of Environmental Economic Accounts. Every nation of the world has a system of accounts that maps things like your carbon footprinting and water quality and air quality, things like that. And then, of course, it's all tied together with data collection and things like that. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, why, you know, so I know all of you know that, but here's the reasons why I didn't even know about this. George W.H. Bush, our president, actually signed Agenda 21. He just didn't bring it back to our Senate for ratification, so it's not considered a hard treaty. Bill Clinton, though, you know, he wasn't expected to be elected the next year, but he was, and through an executive order, you know, he set up a thing called the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And again, all of these documents are on the website in the executive summary, so you can go look at them yourself. And then, of course, all of this is being done through non-government organizations like the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives. And these are massive organizations that have lots of money. The International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives received $13 billion of our stimulus tax money in the first go-round to do projects that they deem to be of value. And of course, you know, a lot of you can go to their website and look up cities and counties that are members of ICLEI, as it's called. And then there's, other things called the American Planning Association, the U.S. Green Building Council. What a huge organization. And a lot of these are global, so they're just massive. Fourth reason I really want to get this one is there's a whole lingo and jargon that goes with this. And this man, Gary Lawrence, was the advisor to President Clinton. He was speaking in England to a group trying to educate them as to how they could elect people who would be friendly to local Agenda 21 ideology. Look at this quote. This is pretty shocking stuff. He said, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. This segment of our society who fear one world government and the human invasion of the United States, through which our individual freedom would be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So we call the process something different. We call it comprehensive planning, growth management, and smart growth. So when you hear those words, there's more than just kind of what our government is doing. This is where it comes from, and it's code for other things. These are some of the other words, and we won't take the time on that to go through those. But all of this was reaffirmed last summer in Rio de Janeiro at the 20th anniversary. Agenda 21 is, they're introducing a new lingo for that, the Millennium Project. You'll hear some about Millennium Project goals, things like that. Calling for fundamental ways in which we act and think, as usual. They tend to control at the local level through land use planning, and this is their words, not mine. So land use planning is something we need to be looking at on a local level. Energy regulations on the national level, and technology diffusion. That's the study of how fast a concept can be pushed through a different culture and grasp. So those are some things to be aware of. What can be done? Well, remember again, this is the one thing that is indispensable to sustainable development taking us over. It's this transfer of private property. So we can stop it there. So here's what we all need to do. Be vigilant and be vocal and be proactive. And some things you can do. And I know this isn't for everybody. Some of you are interested in Common Core. That's good. Some of you are interested in other issues, healthcare. But some of you are going to be interested in property. And this is one of the ways we protect this. Monitor local government efforts and to restrict property or to take it. Inform local officials. Don't go in using toxic language like, man, the UN is trying to take us over and Agenda 21 has permeated all of us. That may be true, but don't say it that way because you just see the lines go. These people need concrete help, not scare tactics, okay? We need to pass good public policy legislation and limit government's abilities to take our property and mandate private property restrictions. In a minute, Representative Perry, with whom we are working really closely, he's going to share some of the legislative things that we're trying to pull together for the 2014 legislative session. In fact, there's going to be some meetings in about a week's time when the first conference, committee week meets, so that we can begin to pull all these together. And there are some interesting things that we can do legislatively that can really empower you locally so that we can say to these people, stop, and we're aware of what's going on, and we want to see some change, okay? And then, of course, help inform and mobilize anybody that you can. That's really a key step. So, things that you can do to take action now. Number one, pay attention to your local government. And, keep us informed. I send out a newsletter weekly to about 2,600 people. Most are in Florida, but it goes out to 40 different states. A lot of people look at what we're doing here to combat these things because they have the same problems. So if we know what you're going through, sometimes we can publicize that and help support you with newsletters. That would be one thing. Also, you can sign up. In fact, I was going to hand out some cards here. Let me do this as I'm speaking. And if you'll here's what I had in mind. For those of you that are interested, we send out this newsletter free. If you'd like to get it, that's fine. But more importantly, as Representative Perry and other legislators begin to put bills through the committees and then through the session once it starts, it is really important to have grassroots support, and that's where you can come in. let's suppose that Representative Perry has a bill that's going to be in a committee, and he is your representative, or you have a representative or a senator that's on a committee that's going to hear a bill. That senator or representative needs to hear from you. You know, when I worked in the legislature, we would get information and requests to sponsor, to vote for bills all the time. And you just get hundreds of emails that come in. You know what most legislators, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but in some of the cases where I've seen, if you're not a constituent, when those emails come in, they just get deleted. And you can blast out emails to everybody, but the one person, or the two people in Tallahassee that you will have their attention is your senator and your representative. And so, you know, so what I do is when a bill is going to be in a committee, I send out a blast email to all the people who have signed up when I say, here's what to put in your topic line so that they'll know that you're a constituent. Here's kind of what to say. You can reword it and stuff like that. It's basically, I am in support of this bill. I want you to vote for this bill. You know, when you get to your legislator, boy, that means a lot. And so if you can do that. So if you'd like to do that, put your email address on that card and just give it to me, or bring it over here at some point during the break. But and write carefully, okay, so I can read it. Sometimes people don't do that. We're a 501c3 too. We live and die by the contributions of people, and we ask people to become supporting members or contributing members to CPR. We'll do the newsletter for free. That's not a problem, but we need people's support, and we ask individuals to become CPR contributing members for as little as $25 a year to $250, and we have corporations that will do $250 to $1,000. I want to say, don't sacrifice what you're doing on the local level to give to us, because what you're doing is the most important thing. Stay there. But if you can help, that would be a tremendous thing. And you know, checks made to CPR and mailed to us are tax deductible. We have a PayPal account that you'll see on our website, and that would be a tremendous help. Let me close by saying this right here. Thomas Jefferson said this: the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. It's hard to be eternally vigilant. And I remember after the last election, we were all so tired and discouraged and stuff. But that's the price of freedom, and we've chosen to pay that. And again, going back to Arthur Lee, you know, the right of property is the guardian of all the other rights. All the other ones are important, but this one is the gate. And so we have to maintain that. And then just in closing, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin: if we don't hang together, we will surely hang separately. And it's great that you are here and we're hanging together. We all have a lot of different issues, I know that, but we're hanging together on these issues, and it will make a difference if we'll just do that and be vigilant, okay? Thanks for letting me do this.